In this video, we are going to have a look at implementing scrolling on our app or on an app screen. If we have, for example, a long form or lots of inputs that we need to have on a single screen, and we need to implement scrolling so that the user can scroll up and down. There are, of course, arguments for and against implementing scrolling. You may, if you're building out a complicated form, you may wish to split the form into multiple screens so that the user doesn't need to scroll, but there can be cases where you may want to allow scrolling to keep things on a single screen, which may in fact be better for usability. It really depends on what you're implementing and the requirements and peculiarities of your users. So let's just see how we can implement a longer page here. So if we need a long screen and we need to add components all the way down. So the first thing we need to do, if we wanted to add some components controls here and bump our save button down, at the moment we're kind of limited with our screen height on this form. So to give us some more space, we can actually click on, make sure you click on the form itself and the Project Explorer, and then look at the properties window, and we can change the design height. So let's change that to 1,000, and that will give us some extra height. And we can see now we've actually got a lot more room to play with, and you can make this height as much as you need. If we wanted to reduce it back down a bit, we could change it to 800, and we've got that. Okay, so we're expecting the cutoff on a mobile device, or if we look over at our example screen here in Chrome, we can see the cutoff is just below the save button. So we're going to move this button down a bit so it's below this cutoff point, just as an example. So I'm going to do this just by nudging the top value down to, let's say, 700. And there it's nudged all the way down to the bottom of the screen. Okay, so let's just save that and run it in our browser. Okay, so we can see now the save button is not there, but if we scroll, so I'm just using the scroll feature on my browser, we can see the buttons down the bottom. Okay, so for argument's sake, let's say we've added a lot more fields in to this form. We now need to fix a couple of bits and pieces. So you'll notice that if we scroll, then our hamburger menu at the top seems to stay in place, which is good, but our header disappears, scrolls out of view. Now, I don't particularly like that. I want my header to maintain its position, for it to be persistent, just for consistency. So let's see how we can fix that. So the first point to look at would be to access that header, which is on our form 1, and that's our header global. Now what we look at would normally be the position. Now our position is set as fixed. Now fixed is what it should be, and actually a fixed position should keep it at the top of the screen. But something's not working here, so it's not actually being fixed. So let's troubleshoot this. So how would we go about that? Well, as we've seen in the previous video, perhaps we need to try a global project CSS rule to force this header menu to be fixed. But let's just use developer tools to assess what's going on with this header. So if we right click on it and go inspect, this is in Chrome. Okay, that's highlighted our header global control. And you can see it's a div element with lots of styling. And this directly relates to this header control in our Project Explorer. So if we look at this here, we can actually carry out an experiment. So for some reason, if we look down the styling rules, if we have styles open, we can actually see that the header global item, it has its position set as absolute for some reason. Now, we can manually change that in the browser just to test what happens. So if we change it to fixed and hit enter, and then we scroll and we can see that the header menu actually stays fixed. So that's what we want. But the problem is the change we've made here is just temporary. It's just in our browser. If we hit refresh, then of course it goes back to normal. So we need to make that change persistent. So if we inspect element again, remind ourselves of the element we want to target. So we're going to target this element with ID equals header global, and we're going to manually write a CSS or styling rule to make this fixed. Okay, so let's do this in AppStudio. So we'll open project CSS. We will write the identifier there, or the targeting rule. So we're using the hash symbol because it's an ID, and that's the CSS convention. So this will target the header global element, and we'll use our curly braces. And let's set the rule, position, fixed. Let's save that and rerun. And there we go. We've now refreshed it, and that header menu is staying fixed. And we can access that menu even if we scroll. So this demonstrates how sometimes, even though the settings may seem to be set in the properties window in AppStudio, but sometimes you need to do a little bit of troubleshooting. And if all else fails, you can apply a global CSS rule to fix any styling issues that you may be having.